Well, good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for being here. We're going to meet from 1:30 to 3, and my intent is to present for an hour and then have a half an hour for us to talk. First few slides just go over some key housekeeping. The course is being recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, feel absolutely free to disable your microphone in your video broadcast. You can chat. Everyone's been muted except for me. If you have a question for me, please put it in the chat. Brian Hanley's going to be watching those, compiling them, and organizing them so that I can address them during the Q&A. You should have gotten a stress management worksheet. You're going to want to use that during the session today. So if you can have that available on your computer or laptop or in paper, that's great. If you have issues, here are a few ideas. The moderators might be able to help you with tech issues. Hopefully everything goes smoothly. So we're here for the first module of 4 on psychological first aid. And this one is going to focus on coping with stress, basic stress skills. So let me tell you just a minute about myself and where this material comes from. This was originally developed for use by neighborhood emergency response team members, the NERT program, which is part of the CERT, statewide, nationwide CERT program. It was funded by the San Francisco Department of Public Health and developed by myself and Susan Schmitz, who has a master's degree in international disaster psychology and was working for San Francisco CARD, San Francisco Community Agencies Responding to Disaster, also helped support the development of this curriculum. Captain Arteseros of the San Francisco Fire Department, nurse volunteers, Shea Valdez of SF CARD, all gave feedback and helped create it. The materials are pulled from research and also clinical and disaster responder experiences. It's consistent with what's being taught through Red Cross, through FEMA, but seems complementary. Our focus was really to have very specific practical skills that you could use under challenging circumstances. And having looked at the responses that you were kind enough to give to the pre-course survey, you clearly faced challenging circumstances, particularly this past year. A little bit about me. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I've specialized in anxiety, crises, panic attacks, stress for, I guess it's over 40 years now. I spent 32 years at the Kaiser Clinic Psychiatry Department in Fremont, and where I ran panic groups, anxiety groups, crisis intervention groups. I did nighttime and weekend or holiday shifts to the emergency room and was on the crisis team. So a little bit about me. I'm now in private practice in San Francisco and have been teaching this curriculum for at least 8 years. So thank you. Welcome for being here. I hope that you get some tools from this that you can use in your daily life and in your work. Today, we're going to focus on self-care and care for others, dealing with stress. Now, I know this has just been something that in the survey responses, everybody was asking about, what can I do for self-care? How can I help my coworkers or my supervisees? What about PTSD? How can I calm my body? How can I calm my mind? How can I protect myself and counter the effects of stress? So that's going to be our focus in this module. We'll go over the common effects of stress, help you find your own personal stress signals, look at skills that reduce stress and that will increase your coping abilities and your resilience to stress. We'll talk about the signs of problematic stress and of trauma reactions. And then we'll end with a few resources for more information and skills. And as I said, hopefully about a half an hour for Q&A and discussion through the chat. So let's start out with, what can you predict in stressful situations? What are you going to run into? Well, think about what stresses you, what stresses your teammates, your coworkers. Maybe it's being understaffed. Maybe it's death, injury. Maybe it's the way the people you're trying to help are responding to you. You know, there are a lot of sources of stress, and then we added COVID in, and we've got the fire seasons that have been just worse than usual. So what are some likely stressors? As you think about what you deal with, here's some things to consider. There's when you don't have adequate resources or people or time or equipment. When people make impossible demands, you know, you can't save everybody. You can't make everybody happy. You can't cure severe mental illness. You can't control other people's reactions. You work under challenging conditions, and in a disaster setting, everything gets more challenging. You're dealing with uncertainty, with worry, with fear. And if you're actively involved in disaster relief, then you're also separated from your support systems outside work and from your loved ones. If there's a citywide or region-wide disaster, you may not only be a responder, you may also be a survivor. So that, you know, you may have also lost your home. You know, you're dealing with people who are homeless. You're dealing with people who have lost their belongings or their financial security. You're going to see damage and destruction. And of course, you deal with death and illness all the time. So a lot of likely stressors, including hitting the wrong button and going back instead of forward. And then there's just the stress that's created by the effects of stress, you know? So let's talk about what does stress commonly trigger in us and in other people. So what you just need to expect to encounter, both in yourself and in other people, because it impacts the whole person. I mean, it's not just body, it's not just mind, it's mind, body, emotions, what they do, all of that. So think about how stress affects you. And here's just a summary of some of the very, very common reactions to stress. So you have to assume that you, your coworkers, and the people that you're trying to help and that you're interacting with, interfacing with, are all going to be having these reactions, at least some of them, if not all. So first of all, stress affects the body. Stress triggers the sympathetic nervous system arousal, better known as the fight or flight response, sometimes called the fight, flight, or freeze response. But you get stress hormones are released, adrenaline, cortisol, and it has predictable effects on the body. Your blood flow changes, muscles tense, digestion tends to shut down. So you have maybe stomach upset, queasiness, nausea, GI symptoms, constipation, diarrhea, gassiness, bloating. The muscles are tense, so you can get headaches and aches, maybe neck ache, back ache, you know, in the body just from tension because the muscles are tense. Your chest gets tight, and that can give you a sense of feeling like you can't breathe. With all of the tension and all of the adrenaline and all of the work that you're doing, you very quickly get exhausted, tired, fatigued. You just feel worn out. And yet at the same time, you can be so activated that even when you're off duty, it can be hard to relax, hard to go to sleep and sleep well. So you can get that restlessness, and that tension and the adrenaline can cause shakiness, trembling. The heart can be racing, pounding, right? So that's just the body. And then when you're flooded with stress, it can create problems in memory and concentration. So it can make it harder for you to remember, what am I supposed to do? What are all the steps? What were those psychological first aid skills that we learned that I'm supposed to be using? It can be hard to make decisions. And then it's as though the mind says, I'm just done with this. It's too much. And you start to get apathetic. The mind can also give you nightmares, which of course interferes with sleep. And part of this is the nightmares is your unconscious mind during sleep trying to process the emotions and the events that you've experienced. And the emotions run the gamut from being anxious to being sad and deeply sad and grieving to that self-blame, that self-doubt. Maybe I should have, what if I'd only, to anger and irritability. Remember, sympathetic nervous system is fight as well as flight response. You can start to feel hopeless, overwhelmed, helpless, like it's too much, there's too much to do, there are too many things going on, you can't save anybody, which may indeed be the case, but getting hopeless doesn't help. There can be, again, this sort of numbing, emotional numbing, or you can feel guilty. And in response to all of what's going on in your mind and in your body, you can either withdraw from other people, which also withdraws you from the potential support they can give you, or you can have outbursts, startle reactions, or be lashing out at people verbally or even physically. So of course, relationships can change in a way that's not good. There are changes in eating or sleeping. You may not be able to sleep or want to sleep all the time. You may feel like you have no appetite or you're overeating. And sometimes in the middle of stress, we do things that really, truly don't work. Like we just want to keep going, and don't delegate, try to handle everything, don't take breaks. And we can even end up taking risks that endanger ourselves or other people. And then, of course, there's a very maladaptive response to coping with stress, which is overusing drugs and alcohol. So this happens in you, in your teammates, in your coworkers, your supervisees, your supervisors, and the people you're trying to help. With children and teens, they have the same they run the gamut of all those reactions, but they express them according to where they are, their age, their developmental stage. So often children are very clingy, they're afraid of separation, they cry more, they act much younger than their normal age. Teenagers can either be overly independent and resistant, or regressive and overly childlike. So pull out your stress management worksheet. And I want you to do 3 things. First is just go through and just circle every one of those that you have, right? For me, I get GI stuff, I get some headaches, I definitely get the muscle tension, I get the shaky, the trembly, the heartbeat. So circle, how do you know you're stressed? How does your mind and your body let you know? So what do you want to listen to? Write in things that are not listed on that sheet. For example, I get cold sores on my lip for particular stresses, right? So first of all, you want to know your stress signals so that you can pay attention to them. And now write down a minimum of 3 things that you can do at home or at work or in an emergency situation that would be available to you that would help you handle your stress. Is it a yoga stretch? Is it a prayer, a meditation? Is it looking at pictures of your loved ones or pictures of beautiful settings? Are there like mantras that you repeat to yourself that calm you down? Sort of like Special Forces has a mantra: in emergency, stop, slow down, think before you act. What are your mantras? It's going to be available to you under any circumstances, including no internet, no phone, no electricity, and you're isolated. So look at that. And as you feel comfortable, you might share some of those stress reduction skills in the chat, because that's how you get good ideas from other people. And this is sharing your tips with everyone around you. So having identified when you know you're stressed, having prepared yourself to expect these reactions on the part of everyone that you have to deal with, and started to write down some tools that you can use. Let's go and see if we can add a few tools to that list. Now, with the stress coping tools that we're going to talk about, there are a couple of things that will make them more effective. One is practicing them, imagining them doing them. When you rehearse them in your imagination, the part of the brain, which is a primitive part of the brain that responds to stress and activates the whole stress response, when you imagine being in a stressful situation and using these tools to cope better, this part of the brain is so primitive that it's as if you have just successfully coped with stress. So the more you practice just in your imagination, the more those tools will be available to you. Second of all, these are good life skills. Use them in your daily life because, again, the more you use them, the more they're going to be there. And then just if you're with teammates and you can rehearse and practice, fabulous. Because the more you've practiced, the more confident you are, the more they are overlearned and available to you, the more you feel, oh, I know how to handle this, the more resilient you are to stress. So the first skill I'm going to cover is what we call 4 for calm breathing. It's also known as diaphragmatic breathing because you use the diaphragm, not the chest muscles, or belly breathing because when you use the diaphragm, the belly expands. In fact, the whole lower part of your trunk expands. This is important because remember I said stress activates a sympathetic branch of the nervous system. This type of breathing activates the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. So think P for peaceful. It lowers the blood pressure, slows the heart rate, relaxes the muscles, lowers the stress hormones, helps calm the mind and the body. And it's used by sharpshooters. You know, if they're taking a shot, they breathe in, and then with a very slow exhale, that's when they depress the trigger, right? Singers use it, athletes use it. If you've done yoga, it'd be familiar to you. So how do you do it? Well, you take 4 low, slow breaths in and out. And, you know, I learned a very simple way, which is 4 in, 4 out for 4 minutes, ideally, 4 times a day, 4 fours. Now, that exhale out, you actually want to be slower. And you want to breathe with the diaphragm, not the chest. And I'm going to show you why. And I'd like you to practice. So I'll show you, and then I'd like you to practice with me. So if I breathe with my chest, watch, I'm going to put a hand on my chest and a hand with a finger above my belly button. When I breathe with my chest, the top hand moves, the bottom one doesn't. And if you take a big chest breath and hold it for a second, notice how much tension there is. You do not need to be more tense in a stressful situation. When you breathe with the diaphragm, watch which hand moves. Lower hand, and this hand basically didn't move at all. I mean, if I want to top it off, there might be a little that goes up top, but it's all down here. And then as I breathe out, the belly pulls in. So do that now. A hand on your chest, hand with a finger on your belly button. And just put all the air down into the diaphragm as you breathe in 1 to 4. And now breathe out even slower. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, bring in and now out. One more time. And out. And maybe one more time. And notice what happened in your body. Oftentimes you'll find that muscles relax as you slow your breathing, especially your exhale, and make it low. The body calms. You may feel more clarity. If you want to put in the chat what you noticed, that would be great. And the beauty of this technique of 4 for calm breathing is you can do it anytime, anywhere. Nobody's going to know, but it helps counter the hormones, the stress hormones that are automatically released, helps calm the body. Now, we're talking about coping with stress, but part of coping is preventive, right? You fight the fire, but ideally you want to prevent the fire. How can we reduce some of those stressors? The more you clarify what you're responsible for, who's supposed to do what. We know that there are lower stress levels and distress levels when you know what my role is. What have I trained to do it? I know what to do, I know how to do, and I know who to go to if there's something that comes up. The more you have a clear chain of command, you know who's going to be there for you, what you're responsible for and what you're not, what you can expect, and are you trained for it? And again, the more you train, don't just train physically, train psychologically, right? Practice and run it through in your imagination. And have a plan B, because as the Army says, no battle plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. Things go sideways all the time. But the more you practice and the more you feel like, okay, I know what to do, the more confident you are, the more skilled you are, and that adds to your resilience and protects you against some of the negative impact of stress. The more you have a sense of control, the less stressed you feel. And make this a team project, and maybe you want to share with your teammates, I get real snappy when I'm stressed. Oh, really? I get totally withdrawn. Well, you need to know, because when your teammate's snappy, they're not just being a jerk, they're letting you know that they're stressed. And when this person's withdrawing, they're not just being a jerk, they're letting you know that they're stressed. So the more you know both your signals and each other's signals, the more you can respond appropriately and help. And also the more you can share, well, what works for you, sometimes physical touch really helps. Other people just want to be left alone. Some people want to exercise. Some people want to vent, right? Got to find what it is. And you want to have, again, you want to have several techniques available to you. You want to create as much as possible. And I know this is not entirely possible, and I do understand that. But to the extent that your actions and your words create a supportive environment, one that basically says, you're my teammate, and I understand you're stressed, and I'm going to try and adapt what I do to help relieve your stress and work with you the way you are. I'm going to work with the people I have to I'm trying to help. I'm going to accept them as they are. Ask for help. You should be able to turn to one another. In a disaster, if you can have a separate staging area for responders that is out of sight of survivors and ideally out of earshot, although that may not be possible, a place to get away, a place to cry or yell. You want to provide food and water. You want to make sure that everybody takes breaks. If you're working in an agency and you may be in that agency when there is a disaster and may be stuck there, does your agency have some kind of bedding for staff to sleep over, food and water if needed in an emergency? Plan ahead, okay? Now, we've talked about knowing your stress signals, maybe sharing those stress signals with one another. And I would like to encourage you to talk about the idea of a mutually respected and accepted code phrase that basically says either, I've just hit a wall and I need to take a break. Or I'm seeing that you're stressed. I'm suggesting that you take a break. And the phrase we created for that was, it's time to take 5. Time to take 5. Because if you don't respond to stress and use your skills, stress is going to interfere. Remember, it's going to interfere with your memory, with your decision making, with your emotional responses, with your empathy. And everyone is different. People hit the wall physically at different times. People hit the wall emotionally at different times. And you can't be inside somebody else's body and temperament and personality. So you want to respect it when you hear it. And if somebody says it to you, I encourage you to respect that as well. Even if you disagree, it's not going to hurt to go take a break. And then think, what do I need? Do I need to hydrate? Do I need to rest? Do I need to eat? Do I need to process something? Do I need some information? What's needed? So time to take 5. That's the second skill. So we got 4 for calm, time to take 5. Let's talk about mindfulness. Mindfulness is an incredible stress reducer. One way to think about mindfulness is that it is being present, actually present, not what ought to be or what you just saw or what you're worried you're going to see, but what's happening right now, so you're not reliving the past or worrying about the future. And there's a really quick mini mindfulness exercise that I'd like you to do with me. We're going to do it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You could make it even quicker, a 3, 2, 1. But here's how it goes. Look around right now. I want you to just, if you're alone, say out loud. If you're in a group, say silently. 3 things that you see: objects or colors. I'm sorry, I said 3. 5 things that you see. Now listen and see if you can hear 5 different sounds. My voice, maybe the electronic sound, maybe something outside, maybe the chair, maybe breathing. And what are 5 things that you feel physically in your body? Maybe the temperature, shoes on your feet, body on the chair. Name those 5 things. Now look around and name 4 different things that you see, objects or colors. And listen, what are 4 things that you hear right now? Maybe they're the same, or maybe you hear something different this time. What are 4 things you feel in your body physically? 4 different things. Search for 4 different things. And now name 3 things that you see, 3 things that you hear, 3 things that you feel, 2 more things that you see, 2 things that you hear, 2 things that you feel, 1 thing that you see, 1 thing you hear, 1 thing you feel. And notice what happened as you did that. What was the effect of that? A lot of times you feel more grounded, you feel calmer, whatever chatter was going on in your head starts to subside. I think of it as getting outside your head and reconnected to the present. Now, this is a good thing to do if you're in a relatively safe and non-traumatizing environment, right? There are times when we don't want to connect to the actual present around us. Although even then, just like, what am I feeling in my body? What is my breathing? What is my body doing? Even that can help, even in the midst of traumatic situations. There are times when we're relaxing and we want to get away. So another way is to sort of get out of your head into someplace entirely different. So take a moment and just eyes open or eyes closed, take yourself someplace you'd really love to be. This can be particularly poignant after the year we've had with COVID, nobody going anywhere. But something that's safe, calm, peaceful, where there's nothing to disturb you, nothing to bother you. Just beauty, peace, and calm. And think about what you see in that place, what you hear. Maybe any pleasant scents or tastes. Just make it real. And just enjoy that. That's right. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you to come back. But this is a wonderful tool to use on breaks to get away. Sometimes during particularly busy days, when I was at Kaiser, I'd close the door, block it, I'd turn out the light. I had a recliner for patients. I'd recline back and I would just do that 4 for calm breathing and go someplace else. So it's a particularly good tool for breaks and for going to sleep. Because again, remember, stress can interfere with sleep. So tools that you can use for healthy coping during stress. The 4 for calm breathing, particularly with a slow exhale, low and slow. Recognizing signs of stress and maybe it's time to take 5, thinking about what you need. If there are ways that you can limit your exposure. Do healthy coping. So that's healthy snacks, not a whole bunch of alcohol, comfort food, stretches, exercise. Exercise, again, breaks down some of the adrenaline, breaks down and uses up some of the cortisol, releases endorphins, which can lift mood and reduce stress. Yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, walking, physical exercise of any kind, spiritual practices, meditation, prayer, chanting, mantras, the breathing that we talked about. Music, if you have access to music, music can either calm or energize you, can lift your mood or provide catharsis. You can choose the music that's right for you. Reach out to people who go through this with you. Reach out to your teammates, particularly those who can listen and offer support, good advice, who will not judge or criticize. And then reach out to them as well, because when you reach out to someone else, it helps you as well as them. Make it safe to talk about the difficulties so they can be problem solved, or at least so you all get support while dealing with them. And then I'm going to talk about a resource about how to write about stressful situations so as to minimize the effects on you. So what about afterwards? What can you expect? Well, you know, it's not like it's over, you go off shift and like, it's all gone. Of course not. It lingers. We process. I remember I was in my home office one day and heard this enormous crash outside, ran outside, and woman was having a grand mal seizure, was alone in the car, had been driving, began seizing, crashed into the house across the street, barely missing a child who had been walking down the street and was still seizing. So I went over, I was able to, reach in, turn off the car, make sure she wasn't harming herself, stayed with her till the paramedics got there. But, I processed that. I thought about it. I talked about it. When I had a fall on the coming down from Yosemite Falls and almost went over the edge, I had a lot of dreams about that, processed that a lot. Our brain needs to process stressful, traumatic experiences. This is natural, normal, healthy, and really, really necessary. If you try to pretend that nothing bad happened and it doesn't stress you, you get more stressed, right? Or if you try to numb yourself out, the stress just stays there and it's not addressed. So understand that part of this is actually a healthy response. And the more you can talk to people who will let you talk and let you process, the more you can write about what has happened, particularly with an emphasis on what can I take from this? What have I learned from this? What positive was there in this? The more you connect to your values, this, what I do is so stressful, and here's why it's worthwhile. Here's why I do this. While I can't save everyone, I can't fix everything, I can't be perfect, I can't always make the right decision. On the whole, the world's a better place for me doing what I do than if I wasn't there. So write, process, think, talk, expect that there's going to be a transition period, right? Expect that you may have stress signals activated, stress reactions activated. So, again, if teammates know that, if your loved ones know that, they can understand what's going on. Don't withdraw. I mean, unless that really is how you process and it works successfully for you, even introverts need social connections. So keep up your relationships. If it's been a major disaster, limit your media viewing. Don't read the paper about it. Don't watch it on TV. Don't look at the social media posts about how awful it was and the heart-wrenching stories. That's just going to add more levels of trauma. Okay. Create instead a very positive environment. What brings you peace? What brings you comfort? What brings you joy? What brings you calm? What gets you away from your work, away from trauma? What's the counter? Hug your kids, hug your pets, have safe, comforting surroundings that support healing and processing. Okay? Talk with others. Don't be alone. Don't try and handle this alone. And even out of awful experiences, we can create from that. We can distill from that good. And that's part of your job, is what can I take from this to help in the future? It's like taking coal and turning it into a diamond, right? There was fascinating research by the psychologist James Pennebaker, and I'll have one of his books if you're interested in reading more on the resources list. He found that if you wrote, even just for 10 minutes, if you wrote about painful or even traumatic experiences like abuse or molest that you'd had in your childhood, that over the next several weeks and months, and if you wrote about these with a focus on sort of trying to understand and make sense out of what happened and pull something from it that you could take from the future, that strengthened you, that maybe gave you more wisdom, more empathy, more self-compassion, a greater perspective, clarified your values, right? That people's physical and mental health improved. So go back to your personal worksheet and think about what we've talked about. Maybe you want to add the 4 for calm, diaphragmatic breathing, low, slow exhale, if that wasn't there. Maybe you want to add time to take 5. Maybe you want to make it a point to share your signals of stress with those around you and hear about theirs, and to share your stress coping skills with theirs. Maybe there are things that you want to put in your work environment that can help. Even just pictures of loved ones. Think about what you can do. Maybe you want to put, pad and paper and pen so that you can write if you're far from home and there's no internet. If the phone works and you've got some internet, you've got some juice, maybe you want to make a list of people you can call and talk to. Maybe you want to put music or prayers or a mindfulness app. Think about what you can do. And now pick one of those. Think about a stress that you are going to be encountering. And just take the next 60 seconds and mentally walk through the pragmatics of using that stress tool. What will you need? What will you do? Where will you focus your attention? What will you do physically? What will you tell yourself? If it's coping with someone else, how will you cope with them? And the next two modules will actually focus on skills and skills that you can use when dealing with other people. What you're doing now is, when you imagine using a skill, again, first of all, by walking through it as vividly as possible, it can alert you to any unforeseen problems. Like, oh, wait, I was assuming everything was going to be on my phone, but what if there's no internet? Okay, I need something that's low tech. So it can alert you to problems. And then as you practice, right, you're more likely to do it. So what are signs of problem? We've talked about normal stress reactions that you can expect. We've talked about some coping tools. We've talked about, normal recovery from stress reactions. So what are the signs where you're still giving yourself some time, but it's maybe you need to do a little bit more? Because post-traumatic stress disorder is extremely common. I mean, some surveys have found, some research has found up to 40%, that's almost 1 in 2, that's more than 1 in 3 of professional responders after disaster have significant signs of PTSD, right? So what are those signs of PTSD, right? And we're not just talking stress post-trauma, we're talking full-on, disorder. This would be you're re-experiencing. I mean, like we're really there again. That's technically what a flashback is really being there again. Or your mind is replaying in nightmares or intrusive memories, thoughts, feelings, pictures that just come back when you don't want them and are interfering, they're intruding. You're avoiding. You start avoiding places or certain activities or people or things. Your emotions change, so you feel guilty or depressed, clinically depressed, or so worried. It's like you can't enjoy things. And at the same time, in some ways, you're numbed out. In other ways, it's too much. Just like with the re-experiencing of things, there can be this hyper arousal where you feel just constantly on edge. You're easily startled. You're really touchy. You have angry outbursts really quickly. You can feel as if you're almost still in the stressful situation. This is like you're kind of stuck. The brain's capacity to process, it's a little overloaded, and it's like the engine going and can't quite, can't quite process it all. It's like you put too much in the blender and it's stuck. If you're seeing this, there are a couple of signs that would say, talk to a mental health professional who understands about dealing with PTSD. And here would be the signals that I would listen to. If after a month, things are worsening, or even if they've just plateaued at a difficult level and they're not getting better, things should be getting better over a few weeks. If they're not, pay attention to that. Maybe go get a little help to help your brain process this. Go sooner if your post-traumatic stress reactions are harming your relationships, and absolutely go right away if you're starting to have thoughts of wanting to hurt yourself or somebody else, if you're starting to act on those thoughts, if you're overusing drugs or alcohol. Those are responses to stress that not only won't help, they'll make everything so much worse. And, maybe some of you fix your own cars, do your own plumbing, do your own wiring, and do your own construction. But most of us will pull in a professional for at least one of those, because they've got special knowledge and it's a complicated problem. Well, getting over PTSD, it helps to have somebody who knows what they're doing and can help you find the tools and help you get back on the path to feeling more like normal and to coping well. And honestly, I just think it's so smart to find somebody who's good at what they do. I don't cut my own hair. It'd be a disaster if I did. We go to specialists in our lives, and you're not going to do your own appendectomy. You're not going to do your own heart surgery. The brain is more complicated than either the heart or the appendix. It's no shame to talk to a specialist. It's a smart thing to do. Now, there are some additional resources. One of them is that book that I had mentioned by James Pennebaker, who's done so much of this research on the benefits of writing about stressful, painful, upsetting, or traumatic experiences. Anything from major trauma to a painful breakup, right? And he's written a number of books, published a lot of papers. I think the best book he's got is the book Writing to Heal. And it really talks about how to do this writing so that it is beneficial. Because this isn't just writing, it was so awful, because that's almost just re-experiencing. It was so awful, and this is what was so hard about it. And here's why it was so hard, and this is what I could take from it. Here's what I can learn. Here's the positive that I can create out of loss and trauma and pain and disaster. So that's an option. There is a wonderful app called Breathe to Relax. It was developed by the VA. The VA has a whole series of free apps. They collect no information about you, so it's totally private. You download it and it's yours. It works on iPhone and Android. You can go to the va.gov site and look for mobile apps. The Breathe to Relax is an older app, and for some reason it's not showing up on the VA site anymore. But if you go to either the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, you can still find it and download it. It's a way of practicing the breathing, and you can set the length of the inhale, the length of the exhale. You can have an image that kind of visually guides you. You can set a background that's soothing. You can set music or have a voice guiding you. It's completely personalizable. And they also have apps for mindfulness. They have a mindfulness coach app, as well as others. And they developed apps for dealing with PTSD. Additional sources of more information about psychological first aid are available through SAMHSA. That's the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. Let's see, what else? If you work with children, you might want to check out the website of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And of course, FEMA, the Red Cross. But SAMHSA is a really great source of resources and information, and actually some free trainings. If you want to know more about, say, assembling an easy, cheap way to assemble a disaster supply kit, or if you just want a quick psychological first aid tip sheet, or if you're interested in more of the references and more resources, if you go to my website, which is elizabeth-mcmahon.com, you click on the resources link, and then you click on the psychological first aid. You'll find those. You can also get more information about Susie Schmitz's background, who was the co-developer for the original PFA curriculum. So we've covered signs of stress, your signs of stress. We've covered what you can think works for you, and then we've gone over 4 for calm breathing, time to take 5, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, see, hear, feel mindfulness, using imagery to go someplace else, using writing, using preparation, creating a supportive environment, connecting with teammates. We've gone over normal signs of stress, and we've gone over signals that it might be time to talk to somebody who's an expert in coping with stress, problem signs. So take a minute now, and I'd like you to write down 3 things. Of the skills and the tools that we covered today, what for you, what do you think were the key tools? And what do you think is going to be most useful for you? And having selected 1 or more tools that you really think would fit for you, write down how you're going to practice them, when you're going to practice them, where you're going to practice them. There was some interesting research on New Year's Eve resolutions. People who just make a resolution, 6 weeks later, some tiny percentage that actually are still carrying out the resolution. It's pretty minuscule. Maybe 10%, maybe. People who write down their New Year's resolution, I am going to, and particularly if they write it down, I'm going to do this at this time. Here's what I'm going to do to prepare, to make it easy, right? More than doubled the people who 6 weeks later were actually carrying out that resolution. And if on top of writing it down and being really specific, how, when, where, they told somebody else, this is my plan, this is what I'm going to do, this is why I'm going to do it, this is why it's important, then I think you had something like 60%, more than half, were then carrying out the resolution. So decide what's going to work for you. Then write that down, and really write down specifically when, where, and how. And then tell somebody. It's called making a public commitment. It's going to make it way more likely that you actually use these skills. So I wanted to make sure that we had at least a half an hour, and we do. I'm going to go back to Zoom so you can put your questions in the chat. You may have been doing that. And if you've been putting responses about what worked or what you noticed or coping skills that you used that I didn't mention. Some people at courses I've given have talked about using essential oils to calm themselves down. So, you know, or doing the child's pose stretch, which I tend to do between really stressful sessions. So Brian Handley may group the questions And then just a quick reminder, we're going to meet every week for the next 3 weeks. Next week, it's going to be communication skills. How can you connect quickly and effectively with people who are stressed? The week after that, it's going to be difficult reactions, and everybody's favorite from the pre-class survey questions, how do you deal with angry people? And then the last one's going to really focus on not only trying to cope with stress, but skills and help that can help you prevent burnout. So I'm going to go and stop the screen share. And I can now see Zoom again. Hopefully you can see me. I'm going to open the chat. How can you take breaks if you're the only one on duty to handle the situation? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I got to tell you, really looking at the responses to the chat, I'm like, okay, you guys are in extreme, I have so much respect for what you do. You work under extremely challenging situations. So if you're the only one and there isn't anybody for you to take a break, that's when you make sure, how's your body? Are you hunched? Are you tense? You know, can you even just take a stretch break? Can you take a moment? Even if you can't do any of those things, watch your breathing. Where are you breathing? If you're breathing up here, you're going to be high, tight. It's going to increase muscle tension. Muscle tension sends back a message to the brain, part of the brain that triggers the stress response and amplifies it, because the brain sees, oh, you're all tense, there must be some threat. So it pumps out more adrenaline, which is not really what you need when you're already stressed. So even when there's nothing else you can do, be aware of the body, be aware of the breathing, and keep the breathing low with that slow exhale. Great. All right. And somebody was saying that the breathing exercises seem most important for them. And honestly, I'm repeating myself, but this is the one thing you can do anywhere, anytime, under any circumstances. It is always there for you. And it physiologically helps counter the stress hormones, the release of stress hormones, and the sympathetic nervous system arousal. Another question, is it wrong for someone to say they work well or they thrive under pressure or stress? No, absolutely, it's not wrong. And, you know, we generally talk about stress in the negative way. There is a good stress. Good stress is energizing and activating, but it also feels good. And good stress tends to occur when someone feels like, what I'm being asked to do, I have the resources or the ability to do it, right? If you feel like, I can handle this, I got this, then it's far less stressful. One definition of stress is when the perceived demands outweigh the perceived resources or abilities. If you ask me to give a talk on psychological first aid, you know, I'm going to have a little pre-talk jitters, but the talk itself is going to be a joy because I love sharing this information. On the other hand, if you ask me to do an emergency appendectomy, yes? I think maybe somebody needs to be muted.
Good.
I'm hearing somebody else. Okay. Yeah, you ask me to do an emergency appendectomy, my stress level is going to go through the roof. And frankly, anybody who needs that appendectomy ought to be very stressed because I don't have the capacity or the knowledge, right? So if you're able to say, I'm able to handle this, then even under, you know, we can be stressed under objectively low stress situations if we feel like we don't have the capacity, right? And we can, at least theoretically, be not stressed under objectively higher stress situations if we feel like we have the capacity. So it's this looking ahead. What do I need to do? Do I know what I need to do? Can I do what I need to do? Then that may be energizing and that may be good stress. On the other hand, sometimes we feel like, oh yeah, it's really good to get all revved up. It does give you more power. I mean, this is the fight or flight response. And sometimes you need that physical energy, but it can also narrow your thinking and narrow your focus. So what you want is the optimal level of arousal. So I hope that answered that. Making arrangements to have therapy animals visit can help responders and survivors. I'm assuming nobody's got allergies to the animals, and that they're trained. But yes, part of what reduces hormones is also welcomed touch. And trained comfort animals are non-threatening, and they give touch. I'm going to talk some more about, I'll talk some more about welcomed touch, but warm touch that is acceptable and encouraged. Right? We all know that unwanted touch is stress-inducing and wrong. But welcomed touch releases oxytocin, which is a hormone that again counters stress hormones. Okay, so one manager or supervisor schedules critical incident debriefs, whether people request them or not. So they're just sort of held. And that may be a way to really send the message: being stressed by these awful things that we see and have to deal with is normal. Having a way to process this is normal and healthy. And finding the way to process it that works, because there was some research that the original form of critical incident stress debriefing, critical stress incident debriefing actually resulted in more stress longer term. So that may vary from profession to profession. That the original may work better for firefighters and police officers, perhaps. You'd want to take a look at the research, and you'd want to see what's working for your group. That's the bottom line. All right, and someone's actually written a book on, wrote a book about his life as a way to get through PTSD. There you go. Writing, making sense of it, creating a narrative, putting it in perspective, coming to terms. And, if we think about the brain anatomy, stress is triggered by the amygdala, a very primitive part of the brain, really left over from eons ago, just inherited intact from our ancestors, deep in the brain, that just reacts physically, reacts unthinkingly, reacts automatically, but it doesn't process stuff. It just reacts, and then it remembers, and it reacts when you remember. Okay? Very good if you need to remember that snake was poisonous. Not good if you're trying to process stress. The part of the brain that we developed as humans is much larger, the whole cerebral cortex. It's why we have these big brains, these big heads. This part of the brain works with logic. It works with words. This is where you process. And the more you activate and think through and write through and talk through, the more you're using this part of the brain, and the more it calms down that part of the brain. The more this part of the brain gets activated, the harder it is to activate your thinking, logical brain, which again is why you want to practice. This is what I'm going to do when I get stressed, so you don't let the primitive brain hijack you and take over. Post-traumatic stress rather than post-traumatic stress disorder. Absolutely. We can have a whole range of very, very normal, not a psychiatric problem, not a mental health issue, post-traumatic stress. It's considered disorder when it is seriously impacting your ability to function or your quality of life in a way that's potentially harmful or very painful, very distressing. But you know what? We've all heard about PTSD. We've all heard about post-traumatic stress. We almost never hear about post-traumatic growth. And people also grow from stress and trauma, but we grow by grappling with it and pulling from it, right? The wisdom, the empathy, the knowledge, the ability to help others. Right, during the current pandemic, how can you best get that relaxing touch therapy? If you're able to be close to someone you love, great, and they're in your bubble. If you get somebody in your bubble, otherwise, hopefully more and more people are going to be fully vaccinated and we'll be able to touch again. Natural supplements. I don't want to give nutritional information because I'm really not a nutritionist. Certainly good nutrition, we know. Healthy nutrition, absolutely. There's probably, but here you're talking to, this is me as a layperson. There are probably supplements, but we also know that supplements are a multi-billion-dollar industry and they make their money by selling, and they sell by doing advertising and PR hype. They don't put their money into actual research studies proving their claims. So I'm not saying no. Quite likely is probably what I'm saying, but don't believe everything you read from the person who's selling it. Right. Art therapy, yeah. Children, if you're working with children, children won't talk things out, but they'll draw things out, or they'll act things out, or they'll play things out with toys and animals and figures, or sand tray play therapy is a known and taught play therapy technique for child therapists. And I certainly have heard about magnesium helping, B3, D3 is supposed to help. Interestingly, we absolutely know that physical activity helps, right? Releases endorphins, helps the body metabolize, oh good, we've still got time, metabolize stress hormones, so reduces level of stress hormones. Exercise is one of those good stresses, right? The body gets revved up, the heart rate goes up, and then it comes down. And having the experience of the body aroused and then calmed, activated, and then recover actually increases the body's ability to respond to stress more quickly, to recover from stress more quickly. Oh yeah, that's a great question. Let's talk about the relationship of alcohol and stress related to sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Yes. Okay, so alcohol. Like I may have mentioned, I specialize in treating anxiety. One of the first things I ask when I meet with somebody is, tell me about basically all the chemicals that you use, because alcohol is a depressant. If you're caught ruminating, right, if you've got that re-experiencing, if you're going over, if you're having those memories come back, and those awful images that you saw, you might want to just shut the brain down. And getting drunk can do that. Alcohol can do that because it basically, gets that part of the brain drunk. It inhibits judgment, which is why people do, let's say, not fully thought out actions when we're drunk. But the trouble with it, and it can relax us and it can help us go to sleep. Unfortunately, alcohol, even if you're not fully intoxicated, alcohol, although it helps initiate sleep, then interferes with the depth of sleep, and it interferes with the maintenance of sleep. And it's the really deep sleep, the deep stages of sleep that are restorative, Deep stages of sleep are incredibly important for the immune system functioning, for also consolidating memories and processing memories. If you're interfering with deep sleep because you've been drinking, then your brain and your body don't get the benefits of that. You know, I enjoy a glass of beer or a glass of wine as much as the next person, but you don't want to turn to alcohol to deal with stress, because any benefits will be short term, and it will interfere with the actual processing, the natural ability to come to terms. Let's see. In terms of sympathetic and parasympathetic, alcohol doesn't so much affect that branch of the nervous system. It's more affecting the cortical levels of the brain functioning, and then the sleep. Also, it reduces anxiety at the moment, but actually makes anxiety and panic more likely over the next 24 to 48 hours. Same thing with THC. If you use cannabis and you don't use just the CBD, if you're using cannabis with the THC, with the active ingredient, then, or I should just say with the THC ingredient, it may calm you, but I've also had people say they had their first panic attack or their worst panic attack smoking weed, or particularly with edibles where there's a delayed effect and it's really hard to know how much you've actually ingested. What other? Caffeine obviously makes you more jittery, interferes with depth of sleep. So caffeine is going to make stress more likely. Those are the key chemicals. Women who are menstruating, you may find that you have more stress responses, usually in the premenstrual stage because of hormonal fluctuations. For some women, the luteal phase. So just being aware of that allows you to compensate and understand what's going on. Let's see, what else? Alcohol and stress. Right. Any other questions about the breathing itself? There are a lot of different ways to do the breathing, and you'll see people teach different variations. Some it's like breathe in the nose, breathe out through pursed lips. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's just the nose in and out. Sometimes it's just pursed and lips. Sometimes it's 4 in, hold for 7, breathe out for 8, breathe in, hold, breathe out, hold. I generally tend to avoid the holding the breath because that creates tension, and you don't need more tension when you're dealing with stress. I spoke just the other day with 2 colleagues who are experts in biofeedback and in breathing exercises. And they said everybody's a little different in what reduces the heart rate and what increases what's called a positive thing called heart rate variability. But that in general, breathing in for about 4 seconds and breathing out for about 6, so that would be that slower exhale. Seems to be, on average, the most calming. Now we'll talk about how you might use a variation of that with someone you're trying to help who's having a full-on panic attack. But what you might generally want to practice is that breathing. And again, like I mentioned, I learned it as 4 in, 4 out, but 4 out slower. If it helps to count 4 in and 6 out, great. But you're really going for low diaphragm, not chest, where most of us are breathing a lot of the time. And you're going for slow, not, right? And, you know, we were born breathing that way. If you look at little babies and you watch them and they're on their backs, their tummies rise when they breathe, you know? We were really born to breathe this way. Um, Tapping therapy, sometimes called emotional freedom technique. I'm not an expert in that. I suspect that it has more to do with a change in attention and a strong placebo effect. I have had some people say they got very good results from it. The theory seems, let's say, weak to me. But again, that said, it's not going to do any harm. And again, you're getting different physical stimuli, right? You're focusing on something else and you're doing something. If that makes you feel more in control, if that shifts your attention, that's going to be good. That's part of what we do with the breathing. It's part of what we do with the mindfulness, with the imagery. So what about out of the blue triggers and anxiety from previous incidents? Yeah, because our brain doesn't forget what we've been through, which is good. That's how we learn. And bad, that's how we can just get stuck in a cycle of going over the bad. So sometimes you get just taken by surprise. It's like all of a sudden, wham, you just have this stress response and you didn't even know where it came from. Well, stress response is stress response, whether you know the trigger or you don't. A couple of things to remember. Our body is designed to have a response to stress. It is designed to have sympathetic nervous system arousal. I mean, we still have this in the body so built in because it's what allowed our ancestors to survive when we were in a world surrounded by predators and dangers. So its entire purpose is to be life-saving, to be protective. The harm that comes with unnecessary stress, or the harm that comes with stress, period, is twofold. If you stay at high levels of stress for prolonged periods of time, that is not good. It's not good for the mind and the mental health. It's bad for the body. Sustained high stress levels over long periods of time can actually damage the body. Short periods of stress and arousal that you then come down from or cope with, the body's pretty much designed to deal with that. And unless you have, if you're basically pretty, physically healthy, that's almost what happens when you get on the treadmill and you exercise or you go for a run. And we know that that's good for the body. Sometimes it's not so much the response itself, but it's how we respond to the stress. If we respond to anxiety or stress by saying, my God, I'm out of control. Oh my God, what's happening? I'm going crazy. Or I can't stand this. This is awful. I've got to make it stop right now. I've got to make it stop. I've got to make it stop. I've got to make it stop. Well, we don't control this part of the brain because it's automatic. Or if we tell ourselves, what's wrong with me that I have this? I'm weak. I'm crazy. I'm flawed. All those reactions actually create much more of a problem than just the surge of adrenaline. The surge of adrenaline will get released. And the minute adrenaline is released in our body, the body starts to break it down. It starts to get broken down and used up by creating all the stress responses, the muscle tension, the heart beating, all the changes in blood flow, the whole fight or flight response. It's what we tell ourselves about the body's reaction, about the stress response, that can really make a difference. If we say, I shouldn't have it, then we're going to feel either guilty or weak or ashamed. If we understand that this is a normal, natural, built-in, hardwired response that maybe signals that you want to make some changes, or maybe is your signal to process stuff from the past, or maybe is your signal to reach out to talk to someone, or maybe is your signal to use some of your stress skills, then it becomes helpful. It becomes an ally, not an enemy. It's never comfortable, but it can be helpful. You learn to work with it. These have been wonderful questions. Any other questions about the breathing, the brain, the hormones involved, other techniques, any techniques that you found that have been helpful, that you're willing to share? Or anything that you noticed as you did the breathing, or if you do the breathing, or mindfulness, or any of the tools, again, that you like to share, the changes that they bring to you emotionally, physically, psychologically. Singing or humming. Yes, the breathing changes, you're shifting what you're doing. Yes, yes. And this sounds like a meditation mantra. Nam myoho myoho renge kyo. Water therapy, bubble baths, being in streams, gentle water movement, hot shower. Oh my gosh, I feel my whole body relax. Or if you got a tub, hot tub. 90-90 breathing. I'm not familiar with that. So I'd love to hear more about it. Oh, thank you very much. I want to thank you all for being here. If there's anything else that you want to share, anything else that you want to help. Okay. So Diana is recommending a podcast by Andrew Huberman on stress and anxiety and how to change. I've also got podcasts on anxiety, on not Hive, on, let me see, what did I do? Psych Hub, the Psych Hub website. I did a series of 5 short interview podcasts. You can find it on YouTube or go to the Psych Hub website. I'm going to just send that to everyone. So those might be interesting. Dr. Leaf, podcast on the brain and managing stress and trauma. Jellyfish Cam, okay. Self-care with my staff, yes. It's not just at home that we practice self-care, absolutely. So in terms of as a group, everybody's group differs. The people in the group differ, the culture differs. So, group hugs might be great for some and anathema to others. So some of this would be just being able to bring up the topic and to say, we do tough work, you do tough work, we all know that. And maybe start the conversation of, how does stress show up with you? How do you know? How can I know you're stressed? What helps you? What helps me? How can we help one another? Do we want to have time where we just go have a great meal together? Or do we want to have a time where we talk about the good things that we've done? Or do we want to have a time where we vent about the difficulties and then go on and just go around and offer support and praise and encouragement and acknowledgement and thanks to each other? Let's see, anything else? Cool. All right. My website has a couple of brief videos about anxiety and panic. I'm actually working on a stress management program, and I can't quite talk about it publicly yet. I'm asking permission to see if I can tell you about it. and potentially share it with you. I don't know if I'll be able to get permission, but fingers crossed. Yeah, yeah. I'm going to talk in the very last one about techniques to help prevent burnout. And these are all great. Yeah, yeah. What brings you joy? Because that helps. Anything that brings joy, satisfaction, pride, any of the positive emotions also release hormones that counter the stress hormones. And sometimes it helps to think about when you're facing stress, you really only have 4 choices, and only one of them is any good. You can say, what is there that I can change? Can I change anything about the situation that's under my control so it's less stressful, right? The second is, if you've changed everything you can, if you've negotiated for change, if you've spoken up, if you've advocated, if you've, and you can't change it and it's still stressful, then maybe you want to consider, do I need to leave? And if you can't leave or choose not to leave, and there are a lot of reasons we'll stay in a situation even though it remains stressful, then you're looking at, you need to accept that you're staying for a reason, a good reason. And how do you protect your mind and your body and buffer yourself from the effects of stress using skills like this and the wonderful ideas in the chat? Because the fourth option is, if you don't change it so it doesn't stress you, if you don't leave it and you don't accept it, you stay upset. And that's a bad option. So sometimes it helps to think, okay, what can I change? Do I want to leave? And if I'm not going to leave, then I really need to accept this is how it is. And now what can I do to cope with it as well as possible and help myself come down from the effects of stress? All right. It's 3 minutes before 3. It looks like the chat has calmed down. It's been my honor and my pleasure to talk with you. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for the work that you do. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Have a good week. Get vaccinated. Hug a loved one. Hug a pet. Take care of yourselves.